role-playing games are a fucking stupid genre. I want you to think about it for a second, okay? First of all, what even qualifies as a role-playing game? Because technically you role-play as the character in almost every game you play. And for what people traditionally think of role-playing games as, like, you know, those turn-based RPG combats or whatever, most of the game you spend reading dialogue, going through text-based battles, and just fighting the same enemies multiple times over and over, but then it somehow ends up being a fun and worthwhile experience at the same time. It fucking makes no sense. The RPG genre is infamous for sometimes being ridiculously long to beat. On average, an RPG can fall anywhere between 30 to 60, maybe even 80 hours long. While these games can go on for so long, this allows for the player to feel connected to this fictional world, learn so much more about the character, settings, and become a part of the game. And I wholeheartedly believe that a crucial detail which contributes heavily to this progressive feeling you get while playing these types of games is the level up system. When you first start the game, you're stuck at level 1, the bottom of the barrel. As you fight enemies and progress further throughout the game, you get experience points, which levels up your character. This allows for you to deal more damage, tank more hits, or even learn a couple new skills. As a result, the game follows this up by introducing harder enemies to balance with the player's growth. This constant back and forth battle between the game and the player culminates at the final boss, where the player is dealing insane amounts of damage, while being able to receive heavy blows without breaking a sweat, which is something that would have been impossible if you were at level 1. All RPGs follow this formula, as it allows for there to be a clear form of progression to the player within the world of the game, while also being able to create harder challenges without restrictions. It's a brilliant mechanic really. The character levels up, and sequentially the player levels up as well through understanding more of the game. Then there's Undertale, who takes this idea and throws it off a 12-story window. It wasn't until recently when I realized that Undertale is a game which does not follow your typical RPG formula in terms of EXP and level ups. Let me catch you up to speed on exactly what I mean. For those who don't know what Undertale is, it's a game made by Toby Fox, released in 2015, which broke the internet of its time because of how it bent multiple rules of RPGs and video games alike while still being extremely well made. But we're not here to learn a retrospective of Undertale. We're here to talk about its level up system and EXP system, so spoilers, I guess. Obviously, the game is wildly different from many RPGs out there. The game has canonical explanations for how EXP actually stands for execution points and LVL stands for levels of violence, but I'm not here to discuss that. I'm here to discuss that, but from a gameplay mechanical perspective. See, what interested me the most was, remember how I said RPGs use the level up system to show a character and player's growth throughout the game? Undertale doesn't really do that, kind of. Imagine fighting the final boss of a really intense RPG while at level 1 with base armor and weapons. In most games, that would be impossible or an overly complicated challenge. But in Undertale, it's not just doable, it's recommended. Since you're given the option to spare enemies, which gains you no experience points, you can play the whole game without leveling up a single time. Meaning, you can fight the King of the Underground at the end of the game while being the same exact level as you were fighting a Frogget at the start of the game. Most RPGs would not let this happen, like, at all. You would die from one hit and deal no damage whatsoever, but Undertale lets this happen. Why? That's what I was curious about and what I'm gonna be trying to answer here. So, I did some digging. I replayed the game through all 3 routes, paying attention to my health in the meantime, and came up with some pretty interesting discoveries. Let's start with the neutral route, which is one of 2 routes your average Undertale player would go through. If you kill every enemy until you meet Asgore, you'd have around 68 health. At the start of the game, enemies would deal around 2 damage per hit, which scales up pretty high by late game to around 10 damage per hit. Out of 68 health, taking 10 or less damage per hit is actually more balanced than I thought. However, things completely flip on its head once you look into how it works in a pacifist route. With a maximum of 20 health, you'd assume you'd have to be a bullet hell pro in order to even beat this challenge. And to an extent, you're somewhat right. On a first playthrough, this would be pretty challenging to beat without any prior knowledge on enemy patterns or how to spare them. But this does not mean it's impossible. I mean, hell, even my dad was able to beat this game a few years back on all 3 routes. It's very much possible without any issue. So I ran the numbers with the amount of times I got hit, and the results were pretty different than with the neutral route. By the time you get to Undyne, enemies would start to deal more damage than before. While neutral runs had a maximum of 10 or so damage per hit, the pacifist route always capped around 4 or 5 damage per hit, which is much less than before. With 10 damage per hit, you could get hit twice before dying. Meanwhile, with 4 or 5 damage per hit, you could get hit around 5 or 4 times before getting a game over. I actually have no idea why this happens, and I assume it should probably most likely be a coding thing, because technically, you should be able to tank more hits the more levels you have, if there is a defense stat, right? But here, instead, it works completely different the other way around. And then I consider the possibility that perhaps the armor you pick up while playing the game heavily changes how much damage you take. So I decided to replay through the whole game again, doing a pacifist route with the bandage as my only armor, nothing else. I let myself get hit by every enemy once and took note of how much damage they dealt. Tallied up all the results, and wow. Wait, let me check my notes again. Washua 5, Doggo 4, Carry the 1. No, yeah, this seems to be right. A pacifist run with no armor seems to reflect a neutral run to an extent. Enemies start by dealing little damage, then scales upwards by 1 or 2 damage until the end of the game, where Asgore deals around 8 damage per hit or so, without any pie or actions. Still though, I'm surprised at how little damage you're receiving considering that you're at base health and no armor. I also found it funny that you can tank so many hits against Omega Flowey, yet Temmie deals 8 damage per hit. That is some crazy power scaling. You might have also noticed that I haven't mentioned the genocide route yet, and that's because the genocide route is its own can of worms at this point. The 2 infamous battles of that route are made to be challenging, with each dealing damage that feels fair to the level and context of the game. For this video, I decided to focus more on the neutral and pacifist routes since they're the most unique here. With all this data in mind, I tried to find answers to the question of why the game is like this, and came up with 4 possible solutions that could work. First, the game scales differently between going through a neutral and a pacifist route. If you go a neutral route, enemies will deal slightly more damage to accommodate your health. If you go a pacifist route, you'll take less damage to ensure that there's some form of fairness involved. This answer is based on my pure observation skills alone. I have no code or whatnot to back this up, but it's just a theory. My second answer is more aligned to the canon of the game. It's stated multiple times how humans are far superior to base level monsters through their power of determination. It could possibly be that this canonical difference in power from a human to a monster is proven through the level up system. Think about it. One human without any armor or experience can breeze through the underground until the end of the game with ease. Maybe the reason that this is possible is also because of how vastly superior humans are compared to monsters in terms of combat or something. I might be reaching a little with this explanation, but I still think it's cool nonetheless. The third possible answer lies in how the game works. Most common RPGs have what I call a text-based combat system, where you choose an option, that thing happens, enemies do their turn, repeat. You don't have a chance to dodge outside of lucky misses, so most of the time you're forced to take a hit at least once. Some RPGs are not like this though. Some give you an opportunity to mess up your attack while also being able to avoid theirs. I actually really like these kinds of battle mechanics in RPGs, which I dub them here interactive based combat systems. I'm pretty sure there's an actual name for these two things, but for the sake of the video, that's what I'm calling them. Undertale likes to use this combat system for its game, where the player has the opportunity to miss their attack while also avoiding the enemies. It's possible that whether the enemy deals 8 damage per hit or 2 damage does not matter as long as you're avoiding their attack. I think this solution might be true to an extent, since the game can sometimes heavily rely on fighting a boss multiple times to learn their attack patterns, where if you don't mess up once, you could beat a boss without getting hit. Simple as that. My final answer, and the one that I think probably makes the most sense too, is the length of the game. Recall back to when I said, on average an RPG falls anywhere between 30 to 60, even 80 hours long. Undertale is a heavy outlier here, as a neutral run could take about 5 hours, Pacifist 7, and Genocide 3. If you combine the game's length, it's still shorter than your average RPG. So, how do you show progression through EXP and level ups in such a short amount of time? The answer is, you just don't. Undertale being a game that you could beat in one afternoon could also be the same reason why there's no proper level up system. And that's because there is no need for a proper level up system with how short this game is in the grand scheme of things. All of this to say, I think Undertale has a very interesting level up and EXP system than most people realize. RPGs often heavily rely on the player being able to grind or level up multiple times throughout their games to face them with harder enemies or crazy bosses. But here, this is just one of many RPG systems that Undertale takes and bends without the player even noticing. I thought it would be an interesting point of discussion to make, and one that I haven't really heard many people talk about. I kind of find it funny how the literal hyper god of death himself deals as much damage as a lesser dog. Not even the greater one, the lesser one. Also, if you're curious, from what I've played in Deltarune, being a longer and more complex game than Undertale, with each chapter that gets added, you get more health, stronger weapons, and better defensive items without the need to gain EXP or level ups. I think this is a great solution to the level up issue while keeping the theme of not killing enemies in the game. Speaking of which, I'm using what I learned here to apply that to my own short game, Project Karma. If you'd like to learn more about that, I have a website for my team where I upload blogs and our game's progression over at teamsickum.com. You can follow me on these social medias where I stay the most active, and join the Discord server if you'd like. Feel free to subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and thank you for watching. I'll probably see you when Deltarune Chapter 5 comes out, and we could revisit this topic then.